You're listening to The Big Tech Show with Adrian Weckler, sponsored by Deal. Deal lets you hire, manage, pay, and equip anyone, anywhere. Visit DEEL.com/bigtech. Hello and you're welcome to The Big Tech Show with me, Adrian Weckler. And today we're going to talk about spies, espionage, cyber warfare, hacking, all that kind of stuff. Professor Richard Aldrich is a leading expert on intelligence, espionage, cybersecurity, known for shining a light on the hidden world of spies and state surveillance. He's a fellow of the Royal Historical Society in the UK and Professor of International Security at the University of Warwick. And he's written books on British spies and even the hidden relationship between the British monarchy and the intelligence services. Richard, you're very welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm going to start off with that last bit on that book before we move into some of the heavier stuff. You co-wrote a book with Rory Cormack. Its latest iteration is called brilliantly Crown, Cloak and Dagger. And that essentially was how the Secret Services in the UK grew out of attempts to assassinate Victoria, and then how they grew out of that.
Yeah, we loved working on the book, partly because it was about two powerful women, Victoria and Elizabeth II, and also because what we discovered was that these monarchs were not just recipients of all this top secret stuff. They actually liked doing stuff. They were, if you like, spy chiefs. There's a wonderful moment when the late Queen Elizabeth II is being told about a troublesome Middle Eastern leader, and she just raises an eyebrow and says, well, couldn't we put something in his coffee?
Wow. Do we know who that was?
It was someone in Jordan, actually.
Right.
But this just illustrates the fact that these people have significant power. They're not just decorative.
Is there still any connection there, do we know, between the monarchy and the royal family and the intelligence service, other than the fact the intelligence services presumably are tasked with protecting the royal family? But do we still think there is that interest there?
So the protection is really important. Prime ministers, premiers, monarchs learn to love their intelligence services a lot because they prevent them from dying. But also, people in the intelligence services, I think, see themselves as crown servants. And so when they do something very special, they're often rewarded by something from the monarchy. So typically Charles has spent a lot of time giving out what are effectively the intelligence services equivalent of the Victoria Cross. If you're a top spy inside Al-Qaeda, you'll probably be occasionally allowed a cup of tea and a cucumber sandwich with the king.
Wow. Not the poor souls over in Slow Horses, though, with Gary Oldman and all his pals, though, right?
Not yet, not yet.
Intriguingly, I've watched some of your presentations, and you used the Bond baddie of Blofeld as an example of an increasingly common threat to our society when we're talking about espionage, cyber warfare. Can you talk me through that?
Yes, I think what we've seen with digital over the last 2 decades is a blurring of boundaries. So we began to see this in the 90s, the emergence of people who are part criminal, part terrorist, part intelligence chief, part entrepreneur, and they're all fascinated by technology. So to some extent, Ian Fleming anticipated this very quickly. Ian Fleming got bored with writing about the Cold War, and he started to write about Bond villains, which are clearly the best part of his books. But now our intelligence services are confronting these people for real. And they don't necessarily have a monorail and a cat, but they do have mainframe computers. They do have fleets of submarines. They are the Bond villains of the 21st century.
And when we think of those figures, is there, we talk about states like North Korea, for example, frequently in cybersecurity terms or cyber warfare terms. What, where do our thoughts go when we talk about those individuals that you have just described with their fleets of submarines or their mainframe computers?
So increasingly, the big national security threat, and we wouldn't even have thought of this as national security 10 years ago, is cybercrime. So cybercrime has gone mainstream, it's organized, and the cybercrime as a global industry is probably, if it was a member of the G7, the G20, it would be the second biggest economy in the world.
Wow.
Pretty much. It's getting there. It's getting there. And this means it's not just a problem, it's a threat to national security. Partly because governments don't really know what to do about it.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of experience in Ireland with that. You've had in the UK as well. Actually, a similar kind of attack in the UK. There was the WannaCry ransomware attack on the NHS a few years back, which was really, really bad. Over here, we had our own attack on the HSE in 2021. They were using the Conti ransomware. It was a criminal gang known as Wizard Spider, believed to be operating in Russia. And at the time, we were totally unprepared for that. I don't know what it was like in the UK.
The problem here is really that about 90% of our infrastructure is in private hands. And so we think of security as something which government provides, but actually government doesn't have the capacity to cover that kind of attack surface. And it's getting a lot worse because we're moving to the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things really means everything around us being connected to the internet. You know, my shoes, your fridge, my friend's handbag. These are all devices which, you know, might cost £50, £100. What that means is the amount of money to provide security is very low. And that means, in turn, these devices can become instruments of espionage or sabotage. And of course, you know, in 3 years' time, who's going to put a new software update on my fridge? Well, you say, well, nobody cares, you know, get another one. But actually, if we think about the Grenfell Tower disaster in London, that was caused by a malfunctioning domestic appliance. So, you know, in 3 years' time, when 5 years' time, when most fridges connect to the internet, could I sit with a laptop and maybe get into the back of 3% of the fridges in Manchester, Birmingham, Dublin, cause them all to catch fire simultaneously on a windy day? These are things which government has only just begun to think about and doesn't really have an answer to.
That's a terrifying thought. The specific one you just raised about the possibility of hacking into a number of smart home devices and causing havoc. I mean, that's something I'm not sure we've ever really thought about that at scale before.
Yeah, scale is an issue right across the board.
Because I know certainly in this country, and I believe in the UK as well, there was a debate a few years ago over certain types of, for example, CCTV cameras like Hikvision, and their finger seemed to be pointed at Chinese-made technology, which seemed to have rudimentary security apparatus involved. And so we got rid of a lot of that equipment on the basis that it could be a vector for, at the time, we thought state-sponsored malfeasance, maybe surveillance or some sort of espionage. How do we think about all of that now? I mean, we've in the US they took action against Huawei. They've just mandated the sale of US assets of TikTok. But now we've got lots of Chinese cars, for example, coming into Europe in particular. How do we think about all of that now?
I think what we're seeing is a rethink about, very fundamental, we're seeing a rethink about globalization. Um, Brad Smith years ago said we're possibly going to go towards the splinter net,
Hmm.
and everybody went, nah. But actually, what we're going to see, I think, are a number of not necessarily hermetically sealed regions, but certainly membranes in terms of the internet itself, in terms of supply chains. Because this is not just about states, it's also about states using organized crime and proxies. So, a lot of the cyber crime is located in Southeast and East Asia. It's clearly tolerated by countries like China and Russia. They're tolerating it not just for reasons of financial income, they're tolerating it because they see it as a national security instrument to subvert their rivals and competitors. So what we're seeing is a blending of the spy world, the criminal world, the digital world. This is particularly challenging for national security managers.
And Richard, is it a case that they just turn a blind eye to it, or they're soft on regulation or enforcement of their own rules on this in those countries? Or do we think that they are actually proactively involved at any point?
In my opinion, they're proactively involved. They see this as beneficial. This is part of an attempt to subvert the rule-based international order.
Hmm.
I'd go so far as to say that the rule-based international order is analog and chaos is digital, and we're kind of seeing that.
You said something recently in a talk that kind of blew my mind. You said that there were about 1 million people fighting in the Russia-Ukraine war
Yes,
who aren't in Russia or Ukraine.
yes. Absolutely. This is fascinating, and this is cyber war and disinformation going global. Because what you have are diaspora, both from Russia, also from the Ukraine, in countries all around the world. Some of those people are highly technically capable, and they've kind of signed up to do propaganda, to do financial intelligence, to do sabotage. So the security agencies think there's possibly 1 million people fighting in the Ukraine war, but they're not in the Ukraine and they're not in Russia.
There was a fascinating case in the UK in 2024. A couple of local lads in Leicester were arrested in a B&Q car park. And they, as you have pointed out, recruited on Telegram by Russian military intelligence.
And paid partly with cryptocurrency.
Yeah. And
what's fascinating is these people had never met their Russian handlers. It had all been done online. They'd been trained online. They'd been convinced that they were James Bond. They clearly weren't.
these were young. I mean, because one of the guys
Yeah,
who was arrested, it's 21-year-old from Leicestershire, suspected of organising a Russia-based arson attack on a Ukrainian-linked warehouse in London in March. I mean, that's the level we're at.
and planning a kidnapping.
Yeah.
I think what's really fascinating about that case is it illustrates the increasing use of performative secrecy. So these guys were kind of convinced they were James Bond, but actually the most important thing about these guys was that they were expendable. The Russians wanted them to be caught. The Russians wanted to say, we can reach out and train these aren't Russian nationals. They aren't people who previously, they're Russian, they're people from Leicester. We can train and convince these people to do sabotage in your country remotely. So this is about spreading fear. This is about coercion.
And it was sending a message to everyone to say, we have this reach. How then does the Russian nerve agent attack in Salisbury, which people will remember, 2018, Russian GRU agents using, I think it was the Novichok nerve agent to poison a former spy and his daughter in Salisbury. How do we frame that or fit that into that context? Do you think the Russians were bothered that they were rumbled there?
I think they wanted to be rumbled. and I think it's actually quite similar to, although the techniques are different. It's the pioneer here, of course, is the pioneer here, of course, is Barack Obama and the strike on Osama bin Laden. The easy way to do that strike would have been to bomb the building, but they were already thinking about the Hollywood film.
Hmm.
They wanted something performative, and
Wow,
in
you
the
really
same,
think that's a factor that they want shock and awe? That's what they wanted.
well, shock and order, shock and awe, and Hollywood effect. So rather like the Israelis using robot machine guns, to some extent, leaders like to be associated. We're in a different world now, you know.
Hmm.
Even 20 years ago, the head of Syria, when he assassinated the prime minister in the Lebanon 2005, 2006, did everything he could to cover it up. Now leaders boast about this stuff. They see it as appealing to their populist base. So, Putin's supporters absolutely love this stuff. And Obama, I mean, what did he campaign on in 2012? His slogan was, "Bin Laden is dead, General Motors is alive." Well,
Wow.
Obama went into his second administration essentially campaigning on assassination.
Wow. And how are we set up in Europe, in Western Europe? Are we equipped to deal with this?
I think we're moving in that direction, but we've been surprised retrospectively. We've looked at things like Salisbury and we've gone, oh, actually, yes, we can see over the last 10 years, quite a lot of people have died in mysterious circumstances. So we need to be watching that. The French were very impressive around 2017. They did some tremendous work in terms of pushing back on cyber attacks against their elections. So we're getting there, but the challenge is huge, and we've still got quite a lot to do.
Richard, does Europe have weak links? In Ireland, we're having a national conversation at the moment about our own security setup. And one of the arguments being made is that we're quite weak because we've been traditionally a neutral country and not a very wealthy country. Historically, we are now. And combine those two things, as well as a problematic history ourselves with the UK when it comes to military issues. And we haven't built up a military or a cyber capability. And with so much industry here and so many key platform and infrastructure companies, the argument is now made that Ireland could be a real weak point against some of the uh, forces we've been talking about in the last 15 minutes. What do you think about that?
I think that is a challenge. I think what offsets that is the fact that we have a lot of new countries in the world. They're countries called Microsoft, Google, Amazon. These are quasi-sovereign. They've been really important actors in the Ukraine war. They've been really active in terms of pushing back against cybercrime. And to some extent, these countries are stepping in and sorry, these new countries, these companies stroke countries are stepping in, and taking up some of the slack.
Okay, so they're so big and they have such vast resources that they are protecting their own utilities and resources in their own interest, but nevertheless, maybe we shouldn't be as worried about them being attacked if they all base themselves in a country like Ireland?
Well, we have to ask questions about their transparency. We have to ask questions about their motives. But these companies have foreign policies. They have their own pentagons. They have their own intelligence services, and they're active. So when people finish their careers with CIA, NSA, GCHQ, whatever, who do they go to work for? Quite a few of them go to work for the big techs.
Mm.
Sadly, some of them are also going to work for cybercrime.
Wow.
It's a very fluid market out there.
Yeah, it's a absolutely fascinating world that we are now living in. Going back to the crime element, I can think of a few standout examples in the last few years. The Colonial Pipeline, was one. That was a very a serious issue, and that caused absolute havoc in the US.
It caused havoc, and it caused Biden to pay the ransom.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. People forget that. Yeah.
governments, when confronted with ransomware or kidnapping in the real world, always repeat the mantra, don't pay the ransom, but they paid the ransom because people were carrying petrol around in shopping bags. It was complete chaos.
Yeah.
I find, I think it's a great example, and I know from confidential sources that when that happened, the Biden administration discussed military options, or
Wow.
how can I say covert action options. So if someone like Biden was thinking about really saying all the options are on the table here in terms of how we respond.
Who would they have been against, though?
Well, I mean, this is a very interconnected world. Quite often, they know who some of these people are, where they are. It's a very brave thing to take action against them, but to be honest, if somebody carried out a similar attack on the United States tomorrow, it would be quite hard to predict how the current administration would respond.
I don't think it's hard at all, Richard. I think they would absolutely anything to distract. The new news cycle would kick off, and they would go in all guns blazing, I presume.
Would the helicopters arrive? Would people be abseiling down? It's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting.
And then, of course, we've been talking about, political transnational tension and cybercrime. There are also massive cock-ups as well. I mean, the CrowdStrike, for example, software update, you remember from 2024, grounded planes for hours. Wasn't a cyber attack, it seemed. It was just a software update issue. Absolute chaos. Blue screens of death everywhere. And I remember the commentary at the time and looking at it and thinking, this is actually as bad as a cyber criminal attack.
When your computer goes off, you don't know whether it's a technical failure or a cyber attack. And if it is a cyber attack, you don't necessarily know who's attacking you.
Yeah, it's almost worse when it's a software glitch, because at least if it's I know from talking to companies and individuals and policymakers, that when it is a cyber attack, there is a certain amount of deference to the skills and expertise of, genius masterminds, to the Blofelds, going back to the Blofeld. Well, it's very difficult to compete with these guys because they're the absolute undisputed masters. But if it's just a basic software update glitch, we all feel really stupid.
The things I worry about are the long-term penetrations. So not so much the software failures, not so much the ransomware attacks, the dramatic chaos, the highly sophisticated attacks where agencies, organizations, criminal networks are gaining access to data over months and years. So for me, the standout attack of the last 10 years was SolarWinds. Where, again, similar, it was kind of a software update. It was kind of a background thing, but this allowed not the Russian GRU, but the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service to gain access to both public and private systems on an astonishing scale. And if you talk to national security professionals, that's the one that really makes their knees shake.
Are the Russians still considered to be the most sophisticated actors in the world that we've been talking about? Because we can talk about the North Koreans, we talk about China and their own interests sometimes, but it still seems that the Russians are the ones who are talked about as being the most advanced. Would that be fair?
I think the most advanced actors are sitting on a beach drinking beer. So they're the people who are designing the really top exploits in the world are private. Sometimes they have their own ethical boundaries. Sometimes they'll sell to only particular kind of groups and countries. Others are completely free market.
Ian Fleming would have a lot of material these days, I think.
He would love it. He would love it.
Anyway, Professor Richard Aldrich, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, fellow at the Royal Historical Society and Professor of International Study at the University of Warwick, and multi-author. You can pick up his books on Amazon and other places. Thank you so much for joining us today. Adam Shanahan was on sound. JJ Clark produced this episode, and I'm Adrian Weckler. You've been listening to or watching The Big Tech Show, and we'll talk to you soon.